Hi, this is Srinivasan from CFO Bridge. We are continuing our discussion on inflation. Okay, in this episode, we are going to discuss three things. One is we are going to talk about what is happening currently. Why are we experiencing inflation? What's the correlation between demand and supply right now, where it is happening? And we are going to talk about a couple of concepts like cyclical inflation, particularly with respect to agri commodities, and also we are going to talk about contractual inflation. Last time I mentioned that inflation is inevitable. Why is it inevitable? We will understand it a little bit. And then we will also talk about certain exceptional economies like Zimbabwe, Sri Lanka, Turkey, and all those countries which are experiencing hyperinflation, which you can't even imagine what is happening in those countries, and we will talk about some of the consequences of inflation, right? So first thing is about demand and supply. So let's look at first thing is about oil, right? Crude oil. I mean, there is a reason why it is called crude oil. It's a very its behavior is very crude, right? I think it just it goes up at will. So right now there are few countries called Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It's called OPEC, and then the OPEC countries control about 80-90% of the exported oil which is consumed globally, right? And then there are non-OPEC countries which are essentially consumers. So the cartel called OPEC, which is controlling, and they are actually producing at full level. They are producing at peak level. And they say that, look, we can't really invest, you can't really quickly invest and then quickly turn around and turn the tap and produce more in oil. It is not possible. It takes time. And then, if you really pump all the oil out, then you may be endangering the reservoir as well. So, there are other concerns why they need to pump at a constant rate. So, supply cannot be significantly enhanced in short time. But the demand for oil, irrespective of the fact that the price has more than doubled in the last few months, has not come down. The total amount of aviation turbine fuel, which is consumed by aircrafts, remains the same over the last few months, and automobile fuel remains the same. And let's not worry about the data. Let's look at your and my behavior, right? Have we reduced any of our travel, or any of our conveyance, or traveling within the city or traveling outside the city just because the price has increased? We have not, right? So we have actually continued to, in fact, the airline data tells us that there are more number of people traveling right now. And then if you really look at the hotel, and if you really look at the roads, everywhere else there is traffic and there is travel. Everybody is traveling. The price increase does not seem to have deterred us from curtailing back on our spend. At least in India we are witnessing that. Globally also we are witnessing that, more in US as well. Okay, the economies which can actually afford, they are actually affording, they are kind of disregarding the inflation. So as a result of which, what is happening is the price has not come down. The demand has increased. There is a little bit of this so-called revenge buying, or the revenge traveling has come back. Not a little bit, it has come back in a big way. Last 2-3 years there was suppressed travel, suppressed discretionary item consumption. Now everybody is traveling, everybody is consuming stuff. So as a result of which, what is happening is, and then people are also having money. I think I explained last time that there is helicopter money, there is enough amount of cash available. So there is more money available, and there is more demand, and supply remains constant. So if this is scenario, naturally price will go up. And nobody is complaining. I mean, why can't all the governments, the G7, G8, and everybody can go and call the Saudi Arabian prince or somebody like that, sir, please reduce the price. I mean, can you actually do that? You just can't do it. Because the price has actually increased, and people are buying it, and nobody is complaining. So as a result of which, there is actually a very, very high level of inflation that is happening, because the demand has not come down and supply has remained constant. And on top of that, few of the items, there is also supply chain constraints. Like, for example, there has been a lockdown in China, and goods are not moving across from the world's manufacturing base, which is China. And then on top of that, we also have the Ukraine war, which is resulting in agri commodities not moving out. So we are actually seeing a significant supply chain constraint. On top of that, demand remains robust, and supply remains muted. So inflation is a classic situation. It has to happen now. And then there is a lot of money also on top of that. So the concoction is beautiful for inflation to be very, very high now. And that's one of the reasons why inflation is high. Okay. So that's the current theory why inflation is high. And then there will be a time, I mean, if the oil price continues to climb, I mean, it went up to 120 and it is kind of plateauing there. It is not going, it is coming down. It may come down a little bit and it may go up there. But why 120 also we are comfortable right now is because we are, we are able to spend money, right? We are able to curtail some of the other expenditures and we are able to spend. And it is not that the petrol price has actually doubled. It's not that the aviation turbine fuel price has doubled. So there is somebody somewhere is absorbing the impact of inflation as well, as it is coming down from the oil producing countries which have doubled the price, but the ultimate consumer price has actually not doubled. So okay, you can understand that. So there is an inflation leakage somewhere. The people are absorbing, either the government is reducing the taxes or the manufacturers or the refiners are reducing their margins, or somewhere something is happening. So there is an inflation leakage. So, 100% increase on price of crude oil from $60 to $120 has not resulted in a 100% increase in the prices. I mean, it's not that, the petrol price in India has not become 200 rupees in India. It has increased, but therefore there is a cushioning that is happening, as a result of which the inflation is actually lower for the ultimate consumer. And if it increases, let us say the oil price climbs to 140 or 150 rupees, then you will actually start seeing people will be curtailing to travel less, they will consume oil less, and that will lead to automatic cooling of the prices of oil. So this is the demand supply scenario. Just oil, I took one example. Same thing is applicable right across everything, whether it is travel, food, discretionary item, everywhere the demand supply curve right now is in favor of demand, unlimited demand, increasing demand, a lot of money on hand, restricted supply everywhere. Okay, so that's why we are finding inflation increasing, and people are on a revenge mode. They are not really bothered. They are on the revenge mode because last 2 years they went through hell from the pandemic, so they just want to spend and enjoy their life, and that's what is actually driving inflation globally. That's just one explanation. Let me just take two other concepts, right? I think one we all know, particularly. Let us look at when it comes to agri commodities, right? There is called cyclical inflation. That is, let's say the price of potato, right? Potato grows only at a particular time of the year. When it grows, there is glut, right? We know that potato, onion, they are all seasonal crops. It grows at a particular time. Harvest happens at a particular time. When the harvest happens, there is glut, there is supply. So much of supply in the market. I mean, we have seen that people come and dump tomatoes. There was a time when tomatoes were dumped on the streets, and there was a time when tomatoes were selling for 150 rupees a kilo. This is called cyclical inflation, in line with the agricultural product cycle, that during the time of their harvest, prices go down, and within about 6 months time from harvest, prices go up because of, once again, supply chain mismatches, that the ability to store. You can't really store tomatoes for 6 months. I mean, even if you can store a tomato puree, but you can't really store a tomato. So that's why the price goes up and comes down with respect to the agricultural cyclical inflation. That is one thing that we need to understand, and that's perfectly fine. Nobody is actually going to do, unless you are really going to find some hoarders and punish them by the government. Cyclical inflation is something that we will live with it because it will auto-correct it. The moment there is a rainfall, the moment there is a good crop, automatically price will come down. So therefore, governments do not generally intervene in arresting cyclical inflation unless they are worried that there is a hoarding that is happening. So the second concept about inflation is about contractual inflation. Contractual inflation is that, like, let's say, the case of salaried employees, or let's say the case of rental, right? In every rental contract, there is a 5% or 10% increase every year or every 2 years or something like that. This is what is embedded in the contract. So if you are putting that clause in the contract, so the price is going up and you are not even negotiating. Why is this happening? Because it is convention. Nobody has questioned, boss, why is this convention? I will not give you a 5% increase every year. Let us renegotiate it. Why should it go up? Why can't it go down? So all these questions are never asked when it comes to rental. When it comes to rental, convention is that was, let us give an inflation every year. Same thing is the salary. While the salary is not, the percentage of increase is generally not given in your appointment letter, but your appointment letter contains a clause saying that salary will go up, your salary will be reviewed every year. So when they say that it will be reviewed every year, automatically, review means in the case of an employee, it is only one direction up. And what is that one direction? Everybody looks at the newspapers and others are increasing it by 8%, 9%. I'm also increasing by 8%, 9%, 10%. Exceptional employees get 20% increase. So there is a contractual inflation, and such contractual inflation is in many places. So this contractual inflation is what, that's why I'm saying inflation is inevitable. This contractual inflation will actually increase the cost of manufacturing goods or rendering a service, which the owners or the entrepreneurs or the companies will pass it on to the consumer. And we will talk more about in one of the ongoing episodes about what can we do and how can we pass on the inflation. So this is about contractual inflation, and therefore inflation is in some sense given as an economic phenomenon. Now let's look at some of the very interesting stories. Right, yesterday or day before yesterday, Zimbabwe has announced that it has increased the interest rate from 80% to 200%. 80% to 200%. Okay, so they increased the interest rate by 120%, which is 1,200 basis points in just one day's time. And you have to carry some billions of Zimbabwean dollars to buy bread and stuff like that. So why does such things happen? It's completely collapsed. Okay, Argentina lived with some 70-80% inflation. Turkey is living with about 40-50% inflation. Inflation in Sri Lanka is said to be about 40-50%. So this is called hyperinflation because the countries are completely mismanaged, and the governments do not have a fiscal responsibility and budget management bill. They just print. It is not just that the United States, as I mentioned to you earlier, just prints the currency. For example, in Sri Lanka, the government just printed money to pay salaries to the employees. So the inflation has skyrocketed by 40%. So, it just happens. You just can't print money. Governments have acted recklessly through the world. There are many states where governments have just printed trillions of dollars, billions of dollars, their local currency. You can't obviously print a US dollar. You have to be US government to print US dollars. Zimbabwe government can only print Zimbabwean dollars. So Zimbabwean dollar, you just print some billions of dollars and put it in there. You have to carry money in a truck to buy one bread. I mean, this is obscene. This is what has happened in Zimbabwe, and this is true. You can actually Google and you can figure it out. There are several countries. There are at least some 20-30 countries which are running inflation rate of about 200%, 70% to 200%. That is, so what happens in these kind of situation? How do people live in this kind of a nightmarish situation? That you need to have take money in a truck to buy a loaf of bread. Is that people start eating junk food. This is reality. Even in India, if you really look at it, the people stop eating fruits and vegetables. They end up eating junk food. If you want to know, there is something called a Mcdonald inflation index. The price of McDonald has not increased by the general inflation in consumer prices. So if you really see in front of you, the price of healthy vegetables, salads and fruits has increased significantly, whereas the price of McDonald's and then junk food has not increased. So what would you eat? The people have to survive, so they end up eating junk food just to survive. Survival becomes the most important thing, and when people have to just survive, they eat junk food. And second thing is savings disappear, right? I think people are then getting exposed to vulnerabilities. I mean, in a interest rate where there is it's a 200% interest rate, 200% interest rate, what would you save? This clearly means that people just don't have ability to save. It's a completely failed country. Savings disappear, and even in India, for example, let us understand that somebody is someone is having an income of, let us say, 1,000 rupees, and other person is having an income of 10,000 rupees per month, and if the inflation is 10%, so the money, the guy who is having 10,000 rupees will probably save less. The guy who is having 1,000 rupees as income will not probably save anything. He will end up spending it all on food and other items. So the savings will completely disappear. It actually impacts the rich and the poor in a very, very different manner. Inflation significantly hits the poor, and it takes away their standard of living, because they start eating junk food and they do not have any savings, so they are exposed to vulnerabilities. Whereas the rich, they don't. The rich continue to eat good food, and then the rich continue to save, but they save less. It doesn't really matter, because the amount of money, the percentage of proportion of money that a rich person spends, a guy who is drawing 10,000 rupees salary, the amount of money that he spends on food percentage is significantly lower than the amount of money that a guy who is drawing 1,000 rupees spends on food. The guy who is earning 1,000 rupees pretty much spends everything else on food, and as a result of which the inflation eats away his ability to save. Sometimes he ends up being negative. Okay, his total, if he spends same thing, he may actually need 1,100 rupees, which he doesn't have. He has got only 1,000 rupees. So what he does, he cuts back on the expenditure, food, and therefore inflation is significant. It is very retrograde. Beyond a point of time, inflation is very, very negative on the poor section of the society, and therefore inflation has to be avoided. And what we have unleashed right now is that we have put in a tax on the poorer sections of the society because of I would say kind of reckless action by some of the central banks of the world by printing money. I mean, there was a news item even as of last week that the balance sheet of European central banks. Okay, there are these three major monetary systems. There is Fed, which represents Federal Reserve of the United States. There is European Central Bank, which is ECB, which represents most of the European countries. And then there is the UK's Exchequer, and then there is BOJ, Bank of Japan. So these are all the four major monetary systems in the world. All of them are pursuing right now an aggressive balance sheet expansion, which means that they are printing money non-stop. It is not stopping at all even now. And this is what is resulting in an ugly phenomenon of inflation right now. And it is a tax on the poorer sections of the society, and they are suffering, and as a result of which the income gap, the wealth gap between the rich and poor is increasing significantly manifold. And as a matter of urgent need, the governments have to stop. I think if there is pain, let's undergo the pain, because otherwise the pain that is coming through is a different variety altogether, because pain is going to be there. So it is very important to look at how do we manage inflation, how do we stop printing any further dollars, rupees, euros and yen. This is a serious request to all the central banks to think in that particular direction and do something which is really, really important and critical for the time being. Thank you, and we will meet in episode 3. We'll talk a little bit about what is called pricing power and how what organization can actually do something about inflation and a little bit of stuff. And with that, we will wrap up our the discussion about inflation. Thank you so much.